In this video, Alan provides an overview and a simple restoration example for the StructureSolver plugin for Petrel. You'll probably notice that the latest version of StructureSolver looks a little bit different because of the addition of some new features, including context menus. But the implementation of the plugin for Petrel still functions the same.
The StructureSolver Petrel plugin allows you to instantaneously export from an inline, a crossline, a random line, a general intersection, a 2D line, a converted line, or a composite line. When you export both the seismic data in the form of an image and also all of the interpretation which is present in the original Petrel window. You instantaneously create a fully configured StructureSolver solution in a StructureSolver workspace, which then allows you to perform structural restoration, structural modeling, or area depth analysis. Any changes you make to the interpretation in the StructureSolver workspace, you can immediately update as you wish back to Petrel, and likewise if you make changes in Petrel, you can update them back into the StructureSolver solution. You can save the StructureSolver solution off as an independent file and continue to work in standalone StructureSolver application if you wish. Equivalently, you can open existing StructureSolver solutions that were created from Petrel and reconnect them into the Petrel workspace. So let's just dive straight into an example of this particular workspace. So we're going to work with this window here. That comes from a 3D data set from Parahaka, offshore Taranaki in New Zealand. So we've interpreted a loose grid of random lines across this 3D interpretation in order to understand what's going on with the array of normal faults in this area. Each of those random lines, just so they have some permanence, we've converted into 2D lines that we store in the Petrel window. So we have a survey here of converted 2D lines, and in particular, in this case, we're going to look at one 2D line, A70, which is cut by a variety of normal faults and also has some horizon interpretation on it. So let's just go to the interpretation window. You see 3 faults interpreted, some other ones we haven't interpreted yet, and some horizons which have been either fully or partially interpreted across this window. So in order to export to StructureSolver, all we have to do is right-click on the window, and we can say Export to New StructureSolver Solution. We click on that, and immediately an export window comes up, together with an export report window here, which is automatically generated, which you can save or just look at and review if you wish. So let's just go through some of the elements of the Export to StructureSolver window. So up here we've got the name of the line, we've got the project from which it comes, we've identified it as a 2D seismic line, it's a time section. We're going to export using an average formation velocity for conversion to depth in StructureSolver. We can decimate the traces if we wish, but in this case we won't. We show the sample count, the raw trace count, and the decimated trace count. We're going to export this as a primary 2D line, which was converted, but we'll use the horizons from the primary 2D seismic line rather than the horizons from the 3D interpretation. If we export as a converted line, then we get the option to include interpretation which comes from the 3D cube as well as interpretation which has come directly from the 2D line. Here's the list of interpretation elements that will be exported depending on whether or not they're shown on this particular line. And they include, in this case, horizons and faults. We can select all of them or a part of them, deselect them and so on. We can search through this list in order to isolate items and so on. Down here we've got an auto smooth button. If we click this on, we'll auto smooth horizons to remove irregularities and desample the horizon picks from 1 per trace to a spacing that's appropriate for interpretation within StructureSolver. So just clicking export at this point, immediately we close the export window there. Immediately we come up with a fully configured StructureSolver window. So here we are. We've got all of the StructureSolver items at the top. Here's our interpretation dashboard. We can see what's been exported, the number of segments of each element that have been exported, and over here we see the Petrel icon associated with that. So one of the things is we automatically will export and display at a 1:1 scale, a true structural scale, which is appropriate for structural analysis, though we can change, of course, that scale with the set zoom and vertical exaggeration if we wish. You'll see that the direction of the display in Petrel is rather arbitrary. In this case, it's come up in StructureSolver in the opposite direction, so we're just going to display and flip workspace and put it in the same direction that we had before. So here we can see at a 1-to-1 scale the interpretation and data that's been exported from Petrel. Maybe at this point we want to interpret these two antithetic faults here. So we go to our interpretation dashboard, we say new curve category, and we'll create a fault. We'll call that fault A1 for antithetic 1. It's added to the interpretation dashboard, and I'll just interpret that across here. And because we're working at 1-to-1 expanded scale, it's quite easy to do that interpretation in a precise way. I'll create a fault A2 and interpret that one through here. So they are now in the dashboard for StructureSolver, but not yet in Petrel. If we want to put them back to Petrel right at this point, we can go to Export and Import, update Petrel from StructureSolver. StructureSolver has recognized that the two things we've changed have been these two faults, so they've been automatically ticked. We can just say OK. And immediately, if we go back to Petrel, we'll see that those two faults have been added to our interpretation. And in fact, the last one that was added is actually the active fault now for Petrel interpretation. So having interpreted those faults, maybe we want to do a restoration, a quick restoration of this red horizon here in order to see what the structure looks like when all of this growth sequence above here has been removed. We can go to StructureSolver Restore and Transform, Restore Section, click on that. We can see that there's no horizon intersection errors. We're going to restore with vertical shear. We'll restore below seismic horizon 5. Click on that. Immediately we will get a vertical shear restoration coming up in another window. So here's our restored window. It looks like we're pretty much in a pre-growth sequence at this point. We might want to identify this orange horizon here and then continue the interpretation of that horizon across the rest of the section. And there's a little bit of residual growth here. And we'll just continue drawing that across. So now we've got, I think, 5 new segments added to the restored interpretation. We can go into transfer curves. We can send a curve segment to the parent workspace in this one, this one, this one, this one, not this one because it was original, this one, and this one. And now if we come back to our original section, we'll see those have been put in their correct place on the original section. So I'm actually going to close out this restored section. We don't really need it anymore. And at this point, we've added to the interpretation. And I'm going to come in here and say, update Petrel from StructureSolver, select seismic horizon 6, update that, and you'll see that interpretation is back in Petrel at this point.
For further specifics of how to use the StructureSolver plugin for Petrel, please see our Learning Center, where you'll also find lots of other great educational content.